just finished listening to Mary Chapin Carpenter with Down at the Twist and Shout. Good afternoon, everybody. You're listening to 88.1 FM WVYC. This is the voice of your college. My name is Keelan Tollinger, and this is In the Studio for the next full hour. An awesome Friday, March 15th, 2019 today, with the temperatures in like the 70s or so around York County. It's a great day. The window is open, and it's the first show in technically 3 weeks after the college's winter break. The last one was February 22nd, and it seems like so long ago, but I'm hoping the climate has really flipped on its head and there's no more cold weather to be found. I mean, the snow is done with and we've dodged the bullet for an annual mid-March winter blizzard. But when there's conditions like these, I mean, where everybody can study and hang out outside, we do not want another event to deal with. But yeah, before I get too far into the intro, remember that if you missed any of the shows this semester, all you have to do is go online to youtube.com and search In the Studio with Keelan Tollinger. You know the whole thing by now, but you'll find a channel with all of my archive shows for you to re-listen to. I'm not even sure if re-listen is a word. But anyway, first of all, my prediction was wrong that I'd missed out on the conclusion of the Mueller investigation while on break. It's still out there being reviewed, still able to discuss hopefully at some point in these final few months. I'd say one of the biggest stories, though, that I should briefly mention is about Mr. Alex Trebek, the host of Jeopardy, and his diagnosis, the stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It's such bad news, but he's dealing with it so well. I mean, you might have seen the 2-minute statement he filmed about it, and he appeared to be so upbeat about just like wanting to spend the final 3 years of his contract on a show doing what he loves, and I hope he beats the odds. And hopefully also, I mean, like the sort of high-profile diagnosis that this disease has. I believe like even Apple's former CEO, Steve Jobs, dealt with it. That we see an increase in funding for screening and treatment for this particular type of illness because of this news. So we should all be rooting for Alex Trebek. But anyway, for some special dates that I think you should keep in mind for the near future, let's move on to those. So next week on Friday, March 22nd, is WVYC's Bacon Fest. That's right, it's called Bacon Fest. And it's basically one of our station's biggest promotional events where we give out free made-to-order BLT sandwiches and WVYC branded stuff. So like plastic cups, water bottles, stickers, pins. The free food is especially important though, and that runs from 11:30 to 1:30 in the Student Union lobby, again on Friday, March 22nd. I'll be there before the show and I'll try to remember to count how many students come for sandwiches. I'd expect about 100 to come through, honestly. So I mean, it's a pretty popular event. Be on the lookout for our table. The spring concert is also less than 2 weeks away. Hope you come out to see Steve Aoki, a electronic dance music DJ. That's on Sunday, March 24th. Doors open at the M&T Fieldhouse at 7 p.m. and the show begins at 7:30. I believe there's still time to reserve your place at ycptickets.com. The show is only for $20 if you're a student. But if you're more into business instead of music, use these next few days to get ready for the Career Expo in the M&T Fieldhouse on Wednesday, March 20th. I will definitely be there. That runs from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Bring at least 5 resumes, they say, and get ready to sell yourself. And actually, if you can, do some research on the employers. There's 104 of them, I think, and there will be companies from every industry. And plenty of majors need you to do an internship before you graduate, so there's no better time to get your foot in the door than then. As for this particular show on In the Studio, we need to talk about that college cheating scandal that's been in the news recently. There's one particular celebrity's family that this whole incident really exemplifies, and it's in the worst possible way. We'll be sure to cover that. And next, I've learned about this very unique, and I'm not sure how to describe it. I want to say a physical condition, a way to experience life that's different, called aphantasia. That's not the name of a Disney princess. I'll share what aphantasia is and how it might affect some people. Then we'll take a trip into the recent world of sports, some big names in NFL football trading their teams, but also an incident in English soccer that has basically upended how spectatorship in sports is faring. Towards the latter half of the show, I'll supply an update on that terrible mass shooting out in New Zealand. Deal with it as carefully and sensibly as possible as we all try to wrap our heads around why violence of this kind is spreading globally. It's going to be a busy show here on In the Studio, but we'll kick things off first with a new song from the artist Vampire Weekend, from the upcoming album Father of the Bride. Here is Harmony Hall. I'll kick off the hour in a few minutes here on WVYC. Stay tuned. Welcome back to 88.1 FM WVYC, the voice of your college. That was from Vampire Weekend, Harmony Hall, off the new upcoming album Father of the Bride. So, I'm your host Keelan Tollinger, and we're going to break open this college admissions scandal first and foremost on this hour. So by now you've probably heard all over the place on the news by now, a total of about 50 people being charged by federal courts for basically the largest scam the Department of Justice has ever dealt with. They call it Operation Varsity Blues. And the stakes and the universities involved couldn't be higher up the ladder. We're talking Yale, Stanford, USC. I saw a small mention of Wake Forest. And in short, this all comes down to the ringleader, William Singer, and his college prep business, the Edge College and Career Network, and a charity called the Key Worldwide Foundation. So according to the New York Times, he started to work with the feds in September and basically helped blow the case open. So 33 parents, with quite a few of them being high-profile celebrities or figures, including the former star of Full House, Lori Loughlin, and her husband, a fashion designer. Then there was Desperate Housewives actress Felicity Huffman as well, also caught up in this. And then several athletic coaches at colleges. The competitive sailing coach at Stanford, fired. UCLA men's soccer coach on leave. A water polo coach at USC, fired and arrested. Wake Forest women's volleyball coach on leave. Men's tennis coach at the University of Texas on leave. Now, many of these parents could spend from a year to about 3 years in prison, depending on how much money they paid William Singer's group to falsify things. And we might as well call them fake students from here on out. But there were a lot of things that were fabricated here. So, I mean, like on top of the tens of thousands of dollars that parents paid for higher test scores, they also had fake learning disability waivers so they could take tests like the SAT and ACT without supervision. There'd be people taking the exams for the students or someone correcting their answers afterwards. Money was also going to the coaches, like the ones I mentioned, so there'd be a spot for these fake students in the sport programs. And I personally get the biggest kick out of the fact that there were instances where a student's face was photoshopped onto an athlete's body, like an apparent 145-pound long snapper in football. or something like I don't know, but like a bunch of fake achievements also showed up on college applications as well. But I'm going to return this very soon, but it's getting to about 3:15 here on the hour here on In the Studio, so I'm going to take a quick weather check break, and we'll continue with the story in just a little bit. So in the end, it's just like, how awful is it that like when the college admission process is so high stakes already, there's a few people with like a high enough status that they can have their kids walk through the gates with less pressure. And I don't think we have to look any further to like how wrong the story is than the story of Olivia Jade. So this is the daughter of Lori Loughlin, who regularly posts on a YouTube channel with around 2 million subscribers. So since the story broke, I mean, the number of her followers has gone down by about 100,000 or so, but she's basically one of the fake students who bought her way into the University of Southern California with the persona of a rower. And yet, I mean, this YouTube career Olivia Jade was carving out for herself can basically be summed up as an entertainment project rather than an academic one. Because there's dozens of videos about her student life, all high-end stuff she wanted to share with her fans, most of them probably teenagers. But the real highlight is this dorm room tour of hers that she gave at one point, which the Amazon company basically helped her out big time with like giving her plenty of products, like electric fans from Dyson, Bed Bath & Beyond storage containers, IKEA drawers, all by name. It sounds like an advertisement to me, but Olivia Jade basically enjoyed this status as a social media influencer, a viral star, because of the video journals she made of her life, the beauty and makeup tips she filmed of herself. But through all this success, none of it really is academic. The collegiate setting that she's supposed to be taking advantage of. And when she tweets stuff like, I'd rather be filming 24/7 instead of sitting in 6 hours of classes straight, I feel it's practically insulting for that to have been said when she didn't earn her place in that classroom to begin with. And Olivia Jade has faced a small bit of backlash last year when she mentioned in a video she'd rather use her time at USC to party rather than study, but that only garnered an apology out of her when her fans started to complain, and we don't know about any apparent change of heart from her. So far, the investigation hasn't done any damage to the students and these parents, who are facing arrest warrants at least. No charges alongside their parents, basically. And to me, I think it shouldn't. Because, there were still probably some teenagers who had no idea their applications were being forged or their tests were being doctored. But, given this new circumstance, I think it's only fair that each college involved reevaluates the merits of these false students and considers removing them from their programs. And yeah, it might ruin some lives, I guess, but that would only be fair, I think, to the several dozen students who couldn't get into these universities because some high-profile figure's kid took their spot instead. And we think of how minority families may struggle to afford paying for their son or daughter's college, or even paying for tutoring help to support their academics. And the disadvantages for the non-privileged only seem to pile up if you look at it that way, I think. Racial disparity in a process like college acceptance. When it comes to the financial borders, it just deepens the rift in who gets to have the promising future with a degree. And since this all revolves around stuff like SAT scores, I think it's also a good time to comment on the feeling that a lot of this stuff rides on about 4 hours of an examination. Families can pay hundreds of dollars for a tutor just for this specific out-of-school examination. The college admissions administrators all swear by it across the board. They can use it to represent the quality of their students when they can say, our average SAT score is 1,500 or 1,600 or something. So it's not going anywhere. And I think this allows for these other college consulting firms, like the one that William Singer ran, to set themselves up to demand large sums of money for the tutoring services because of it. But all I want to say is I'm happy with where I've gone for a college, and I'm decently proud of myself, at least, for earning my place here legitimately. But there's students with far more financial and ethnic hurdles, and basically others with far less hurdles too. But we'll just leave it at that for now, and move on from the admission scandal. We've reached about 3:19 here on 88.1 FM, and I'll be back in a few minutes with something far more interesting than cheaters. This is the meaning of aphantasia. For now, here's Hazel English with her song Fix on the Voice of Your College. Stay tuned to WVYC. Welcome back to 88.1 FM, WVYC, the voice of your college. I'm your host, Keelan Tollinger, and that was Hazel English with her song Fix. So coming up next, I'm going to teach you this new word here on In the Studio. This is about aphantasia. That's spelled APHANTASIA. And it's not a made-up country in a movie or book, but it is a fairly new concept coined apparently in the last few years. And it's admittedly such an obscure condition or diagnosis about our bodies that it's really hard to be tested as of right now. So I first learned about this from a friend who's a writer, and it made her realize something about herself as a creative individual that she never thought about before. She has difficulty picturing things in her mind's eye. So what a lot of mental exercises of some kind do, maybe you're sitting down to meditate, and you're told, picture a beach at sunset. Imagine a sailboat drifting from left to right across the horizon. Imagine seeing the little flash of a fishing line being cast out. It's a whole scene that you can just vaguely witness if you concentrate hard enough. And some people can do that very vividly in their heads. It helps artists imagine every brush stroke or every color splash on what they're making. They would basically fall at a 10 out of 10 with the strength of their mind's eye. They actually might call that hyperphantasia, but up to 1 in 50 people, according to a report that was covered by the BBC in 2015, some may wind up at a 0 on that scale. They don't see anything. This was the case, I think, for my one friend who basically said it makes so much sense now that ever since she was a kid, she couldn't physically picture things in cases where you're told to imagine a beach. And she just assumed that she was different than everybody else. So this writer I know also shared a video by an artist online named, she was named Amy Wright Meow, and it was called I Have Aphantasia and You Might Have It Too Without Even Realizing It. It's a bit of a mouthful, but in a way, this artist, this cartoonist, shared her own experience of being told to imagine up her own ideal room, like filled with plants and a brightly curtained window and everything. And instead, all she could envision is just a blank black space. There's no visuals to accompany her thoughts. And you might think, like, how can that be when this person's an artist? And the answer to that is Amy says she needs multiple takes to get an original image to come out the way she wants. And it really helped for her to identify she has aphantasia, to understand her frustrations. It actually seemed to have liberated her to acknowledge this. But it's easier for her to draw on memory rather than out of thin air, if that makes sense. I mean, she can draw upon perhaps the muscle movement of her hands to get the product that she wants, but isn't going to materialize as a preview in her mind first. But for the writer I know, I mean, she has difficulty writing about action scenes of like someone fighting or being chased. And instead, she's much more comfortable portraying the emotions, the dialogue, the more intangible things that are easier to describe because they don't particularly rely on sight to do that. And what are some of the other things that people with aphantasia might experience? In an article by the BBC, they talked to a man who also knew he was different as a child. When his stepfather would ask him to count sheep jumping over a fence, but there wasn't a fence, there were no sheep, there was no motion, there was nothing going on. He found it pretty impossible to do so. And though our memories might be tied up in images sometimes, like remembering the scene of a family reunion in our heads, it's much easier for some to recall the facts, the details, the characteristics of a scene, rather than what it looks like. So this man couldn't see his fiance's face when he thinks about her, but he knew on that particular day she's a brunette, and her hair was tied up in a bun, and he says, quote, "But I'm not describing an image I am looking at, I'm remembering features about her." Now, this one quality by this artist named Amy was actually the most surprising to me. She says in her video she has dreams where she can visualize things, but they occur in third person. I think the example she gave was running from a T-Rex or something. She could watch herself trying to get away, but by the time she woke up, again, she could list off what happened, but like what she jumped over in the scramble to escape, but there's no visualization in her head to basically verify that. The best way that she portrayed her condition is that it's like her mind is functioning like a computer. And it still has all the memory banks in the hard drive, but the screen is essentially off. And like, what about like getting lost in a fiction book or something where you can visualize the characters doing the actions you're reading about, and it all seems so clear that you're entering another world? I mean, again, to people with aphantasia, it doesn't seem to be possible. I'm going to finish up this topic in just a little bit, but we're reaching the midway point of the hour, so I'm going to get the hourly PSA out of the way. So lastly, if there's any way that this condition to be fixed or trained to be overcome, Amy suggested something like concentrating really hard on the blurry images that can be seen when your eyelids are closed. Like, the darkness behind the eyelids isn't uniform, so it might take staring at them really hard and trying to figure out if there's anything in those blotches that reminds you of an item. I guess it's kind of like staring at clouds and trying to form a shape out of them or something, but I guess I'm lucky that I don't have to rely on a strategy like that. But it is super interesting to me to hear this experience from my friend, that she has to rely on other strategies as a creative person to get the finished product she wants. And it takes reminding herself of what a sensation is like before she writes it. Drawing upon the metaphors she's read before or has made before, treating something like a wave, like as basic as possible, like a series of motions. And I don't think it's like, well, he raised his arm and caused the muscles in it to simulate a small flap of the wrist in greeting. Like, I think it just might take like an extra step in condensing that depiction of emotion down to something before it makes the most sense to write. I can't imagine what it really must be like. What it must be like to have just like static or emptiness in my thoughts. But maybe you or someone you know has to deal with this. And it could dawn on them if only they heard about this term. But there's one thing that the scientists who suggested this name insist. This isn't a disability, and there's no concrete way to identify or diagnose it yet. I hope that it gets more recognition as an aspect that our mental capacities might lack, and it could be treated and addressed in more efficient ways, at least so we can understand where creativity comes from and stuff. Can an attribute like that be trained? Is it really a matter of being born with it? But anyway, that's about all I've got on this topic. So speaking of creativity, here's a really unique song title that's coming up next. This is the artist Oso Oso with their song, oh boy, GB/OL/H/NF. I know it's an acronym for Goodbye Old Friend, Hello New Friend though. But take a listen, and I'll be back in 4 minutes on 88.1 FM WVYC. Stay tuned. Back to 88.1 FM WVYC, the voice of your college. Oso Oso with Goodbye Old Love, Hello New Friend. You can look at that acronym if you want to actually listen to the song. But I'm your host, Keelan Tollinger, and I'm going to devote a couple minutes now that I like to dedicate towards the goings-on in the world of sports. So first, I think it's a good idea to go back to the college admissions scandal first, because there's an athlete who's had to answer some questions, from the media, journalists at least, about his family's ties to the ringleader William Singer. And that's Phil Mickelson, the professional golfer. So apparently he had signed on the help of the Edge College Career Network to help his oldest daughter, Amanda, through high school and become an undergraduate student at Brown University. But Phil expressed his surprise after the opening round of the Players' Championship yesterday. That while he hired Singer's firm for the admission and the selection process, he's as shocked as everyone else that this happened. Now, there's thousands of other families who have been using this college prep company legitimately, so fortunately, they are free of blame, but it's just another extension of this scandal. In the NFL, a couple of big-name trades have taken place recently. So Antonio Brown, who's been a part of the Pittsburgh Steelers for 9 years, he announced late last week that he was on his way to the Oakland Raiders, which might relieve the rival teams in his division that don't have to deal with him anymore, but what exactly does he hope to accomplish on a team that's like trying to rebuild itself all the way out on the West Coast? And I think he at least sensed that Pittsburgh hasn't been a Super Bowl contending team in quite a few years now, and he's bowed out respectfully when the quarterback Ben Roethlisberger is in his last few seasons as a player, and they're probably not going to be very prolific ones. And speaking of quarterbacks on their last legs, Eli Manning in the New York Giants is still hanging on as a 38-year-old figure of the franchise, but although the team is like somehow expressing the same faith in their quarterback when they've lost 24 of their last 32 games, their star receiver, Odell Beckham Jr., decided to jump ship and head to the Cleveland Browns. I mean, which, I was laughing at the fact they won their first game in like a year and a half at one point during like a fall semester show of mine. And I joked at how like anything is possible or something. But I mean, the Browns are actually one of the teams that I think is going to be rising out of the ashes. And at the very least could win more games than the Giants next season. They have a young quarterback and they are amassing some talent. But back in New York, though, I mean, they're falling apart, hanging on to their old guy, Eli, I think. At least from my perspective as someone on the outside. But I can't imagine just the occasional, spikes in suffering that it must take to be a fan of the Giants, to now lose one of their stars. Now, it's been a bunch of headaches in store for the team that has to deal with Beckham, though. I mean, he's had his emotional outbursts, towards a kicking net, for instance. He's punched a hole through a wall at the Green Bay Packers Stadium. But the team had faith in keeping him and utilizing his gobs of talent up until very recently, where they've just decided to send him away. And what I don't want to happen is for the Giants to be mediocre forever, because that holds the man, the future Hall of Famer, the running back, Saquon Barkley, to a mediocre career if he stays there. And one player isn't going to decide everything about the trajectory of a team, I understand. Not Beckham, not Eli Manning, not Saquon. But I mean, together they're pretty close to being the definition of elite, if it works out. But across the pond now, in a completely different sport, there was a different matter that you may have heard about regarding a fan attending a professional soccer game last weekend. This was between the teams Aston Villa and Birmingham, the game taking place at the latter stadium. So 10 minutes into the game, after there was a break in the action for a ball that went out of play, a man, which has now been named as Paul Mitchell, somehow climbed out of the stands, ran out on the field, and snuck up on an Aston Villa player who had his back turned. And the guy punched him in the side of the head, right in the jaw. Like, immediately some security grabbed, hold of this guy and dumped him on the ground. Several other Aston Villa players crowded around him too. But, I mean, the most remarkable thing about an act like that, that's so disrespectful, is that the athlete who was hit, his name's Jack Grealish. He fell on the turf, but he sat up and ignored the whole crowd behind him. He just fixed the shin pads in his socks and walked away while Mitchell was being escorted away. He was blowing kisses to the crowd and just showing off his arrogance. But I guess he's going to be a hero to his other likely thick-headed friends when he has to watch every game as a supporter from his home. But this whole thing was just universally condemned as a breach of the whole spirit of the sport. And you can only imagine how much worse this could have been if the fan had snuck on a knife or some other weapon and managed to make it on the field. I mean, honestly, the distance between the grass and the wall surrounding the stands is very short. The banners around the perimeter of the field are the height of a guardrail. And people can hand the ball back to a player when it hops out of play. It's all so close. But I mean, anyway, Jack Grealish kept playing even after being punched in the head. I mean, he got some condolences from people on both teams, I mean, despite how apparently bitter the rivalry is between them. But the icing on the cake of this whole thing was, as the game was coming to a close, about half an hour left of time, and Grealish managed to score the one and only goal of the match. I hope the police opened the door to Paul Mitchell's cell and just to let him know about what happened. But but yeah, Grealish did what every sensible person would do, earning redemption like that. And he ran out of bounds, he hopped the small border, and he actually entered the stands. Fortunately only going to see the Aston Villa fans that were tucked in the corner. But at least they mobbed him with hugs. And he had to be extracted by his teammates and security. But it was again a moment of chaos and probably shouldn't have happened on a normal day. But as for the rest of the fallout with an incident like that, an assault on a player, I was surprised to find out that the only thing the fan is going to be jailed for is only for 14 weeks. An assault on a player. I think that's a very small price to pay for threatening the safety of the sport. Now it really is interesting. The team itself, Birmingham Football Club, is technically responsible for their fans, and this goes for just about any team in soccer around the world. Anything out of line done by supporters is if they throw trash at players, for instance, with the short distance between the fans and the field, it can still lead to further penalties for the team. So the governing body of the league charged this team with failing to control their supporters, and could likely do something such as force Birmingham to play in an empty stadium for the rest of the season, or even take away some of the points they have in the leaderboard. All in all, I'm just a fan now of Jack Grealish for not retaliating and stepping up in a different way. And in the end, he said to the media after the game that it turned out to be the, quote, the best day of his life. So that's good to hear. But that about finishes up my segment on the news and sports. So I'll take care of the weather check for this quarter of an hour remaining. In a few minutes after this next track from the group Joywave, I will come back with a little bit about this recent mass shooting that we had to try and break down. But here is Joywave with their song, Doubt. You're listening to In the Studio, and I'll be back shortly. Welcome back to 88.1 FM WVYC, the voice of your college. Joywave with their song, Doubt, here on the voice of your college. I'm your host, Keelan Tollinger. So, before students on campus went to bed last night, a few of them may have checked the news and heard about a terrible event unfolding on the other side of the globe in New Zealand. At this hour, I think it's reported that 49 people have been killed and at least 48 are injured after a gunman opened fire at two separate mosques in the city of Christchurch. It's, to me, one of the last places you'd expect one of these incidents to occur. I mean, the country seems to be, fortunately, so disconnected from global conflicts and affairs. It had a reputation for being one of the most peaceful countries on earth, in which just last September, I found a local newspaper in New Zealand called News Hub report that in 2017 there were only 48 homicides. I mean, the police reported a 40-year low in the murder rate. And in a nation of a little under 5 million people, this type of offense is unheard of to them. And Muslims make up just 1% of the population in this country. So it's like, who in the world were these innocent people bothering? Like, what kind of twisted idea gave the impression they posed some sort of threat or danger or nuisance? Now, we know from witnesses that this person came in wearing tactical gear and what's assumed to be an automatic weapon. But the most jarring thing in this attack, and I believe it matches the Orlando nightclub shooting some time ago, and that's a live stream of himself. I think at this point we seriously have reached a point where the social media platforms that allow for this type of broadcasting need to be dialed back and controlled a bit to protect against abuse of it. We've become like so accustomed to people flipping a switch on the camera to their phones and showing themselves doing either idiotic or downright horrible stuff. And instantly, as that broadcast in New Zealand was complete, people were able to save it for whatever reason, and now it's being infinitely reproduced over the internet, likely for as long as eternity. And Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, for as much manpower as they have, they can't possibly control all of this footage from spreading, from being downloaded. And they seem reluctant to disable their live broadcast functions. I mean, Facebook especially, because of the use it has for like normal people in most cases. But also, they say like it becomes infallible proof in some instances that a person did this or that potential crime, and maybe were arrogant enough of themselves to film it. But I think the dumbest arguments I'm hearing people express online is to not do something about these videos. There's folks who want these to stay up, and maybe if you believe that having this window into the head of a mass murder will discourage others from becoming the same, I don't believe that one bit, and I'm all for the apparent censorship. So yes, I mean, it can be bad on occasion for companies to demonstrate their powers to control information, but if you've heard my take on issues of internet news dissemination before, I feel we need to do something because it's allowing hurtful messages to survive longer than they have to. And some individuals just don't want to deal with that. I mean, I'd say the least thing that the social media heads can do is pull the plug on live broadcasting. It's unlikely that the government could even do something like pressure them to do so. I mean, that's out of their hands. But when you think about just how broadly Facebook has stepped out as a platform, trying to become the Swiss Army knife for everyone, it didn't need to become a personal network television for folks. It started out as a way for family members and school classmates to keep in touch with each other. But I think the live features give the wrong people too much liberty, honestly, to express themselves and the danger they pose to society. But I think to change topics here, I mean, as we keep examining this story more, we may find some people whose lives were saved from some stroke of luck as well. I remember hearing the national Bangladesh men's cricket team was close by, like stepping out of their bus to join the Friday prayers when they heard the gunshots. And there were a few videos on Twitter of the team in their sporting jackets hurrying through a public park with police vehicles speeding by on the other side of the fences. But thankfully they're all okay and accounted for. And just on the 12 o'clock hour news here locally on Channel 8 WGAL, the station spoke to an older couple who lived nearby in Stroudsburg in Lancaster County after they were spending their vacation in Christchurch. And on top of the photos they took of the beaches, the whales in the ocean, they also have photos now of vehicles with their rear windows shot out, of squad cars blocking the streets as well. Like, apparently this couple they were in a hotel just like a block away from one of the mosques and driving towards the place just before the shooting broke out. And the husband happened to take a wrong turn trying to get back to the hotel, and it may have saved their lives. But we will keep watching closely how the story unfolds, I guess, and if there's any preventive steps that like at all we can take to discourage these happenings in the future. I mean, like, one thing that we're all gonna have to keep in mind though is that New Zealand is a much different case than where we are in America. You cannot possibly suggest as an American to this completely unique culture and society and country to consider an American expression like, well, what if someone like an armed guard was there to intervene with a gun? Because that option isn't even close to materializing. I mean, this is something that's going to take an entire ideological and technological shift across the globe. I mean, right now, one of the most remote corners of the world was a stage. And until we pick apart the factors to that and understand completely what the effects of globalization are doing, I don't think we'll come any closer to a long-term solution. But it has reached the 3:55 mark here at WVYC, and I think that's where everything stands in the world for this edition of In the Studio on this Friday, March 15th. But go outside and enjoy this unseasonably warm weather with your friends without too many classes to worry about, and plan out a good weekend as the midterm wave rolls through. Check out my YouTube channel by going online and searching In the Studio with Keelan Tollinger for my archive shows. And most importantly, thank you for joining me on this hour of In the Studio, on the voice of York College. The last song comes from the station playlist, and it is Kurt Vile with Timing is Everything, and I'm Falling Behind, here on 88.1 FM. Take care, everybody, and have a good rest of your Friday.